I don't see anybody else waiting. Ray, so.
Yes, then go ahead, Radila. Please start us.
Great. So, dear colleagues, dear ServCollabers, as we'll start saying from now on, welcome to the first ServCollabing event, and thank you for joining us today. ServCollabing refers to all activities that link service research to improving human well-being. Today, we have the honor and pleasure to start ServCollabing with Professor Leonard Berry. Ray Fisk, the founder of ServCollab, will have an interesting discussion with Leonard Berry and talk about research that matters. You can make questions to our discussions on the chat or raise your virtual hand at the end of our discussion. With no further comment, gentlemen, the online floor is yours.
Thank you, Radila. It's a great pleasure to launch our ServCollabing with series today, and I'm delighted to welcome Len Berry as our first guest. Len Berry, as our audience should know, is one of the early pioneers who created the service research field. That is one of Len's many, many accomplishments, and I won't try to summarize those accomplishments. I think most of you are well aware of Len's many accomplishments. And Len is also perhaps the only early pioneer left who is not retired or deceased. There are others who were part of that early pioneering group, and quite a few of them are retired now, but Len is still out there, and that's a remarkable accomplishment too. He's still very actively doing research, as many of us have been following that research. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you that Len and I have known each other for 40 years because we met at the first service conference in the United States in 1981. So it will probably be obvious to you during this interview that we are friends. And to add a bit more background, Len and I are both Arizona State University graduates. Right. Among Len's many distinctions, he was the very first ASU marketing graduate, PhD graduate in 1968. And I just in time for the service field to start taking off. So in today's interview, I'll be asking Len for his advice on enabling the future of service research, and in particular, his advice for future research that serves humanity, which is our focus in ServCollab. And I should note that this interview is an outgrowth of a conversation that Len and I had at the Fisk conference in Carlstadt back in 2019, where I presented the first formal presentation about ServCollab's plans. Len was in that audience, and when we talked afterwards, Len expressed his eagerness to help mentor researchers interested in ServCollab projects. So here we are. So today we're going to ask for his mentorship advice. In today's interview, we're going to springboard off an interesting comment that Len made to Werner Kunz in a ServCig interview not long ago. ServCig launched a Legends of Service Research series with Len Berry as the first interview, and in two parts. And if you haven't seen that, it was just recently released. I highly recommend that interview to you. You can find it on the ServCig YouTube channel. Now, in that ServCig interview, Werner asked Len why he decided to make the big shift in his research to service research and healthcare services from his prior research efforts in service. And Len replied that he decided he should find a new mountain to climb. Now, to me, I think new mountains to climb is a great metaphor. So we'll start by talking about new mountains to climb, because I think it represents Len's personal pioneering spirit, and it also represents the pioneering spirit of the service research field itself. So Len, my first question has two parts to it. What is your advice for climbing personal new mountains and for the service research community to climb new mountains? And you can answer that in any order you prefer, personal or the community, your choice.
Well, thank you, Ray, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that's joined us today. It's just such a thrill for me to participate today, and particularly to do it with my dear friend, Ray Fisk. I'm just so proud of Ray and his work, which has always been from day one, service to humanity. And so, Ray, it's my pleasure to have this conversation with you today. In terms of the question that you asked me, in the service field, we have the opportunity to go beyond our beginnings, our very important beginnings, which were focused on improving the capacity, the capability, the awareness of service organizations to better serve their customers. So the beginnings of the services field was really about informing managers and academics about how service organizations could improve what they do, because they weren't selling widgets, they weren't selling tangible goods, they were selling services that presented different kinds of challenges in operations and marketing and management. Where we need to go, and we're underway, but we need to go with a greater sense of urgency, is we need to go beyond the firm customer construct to using our talents, our knowledge, our enthusiasm for services as researchers to reimagine services in terms of service to society, service to humanity, service to the well-being of human beings. And so my initial advice to young scholars as you're starting out, including young scholars that we have at my university, Texas A&M, that I formally mentor, my advice is work on important problems. Work on problems that truly have the potential to benefit mankind. Work on problems, use your talents to help people live better lives, whatever that might mean, whether it's the kind of work, Ray, that you're so involved in today with helping refugees, or the work that I'm so involved in today, and that's helping physicians, clinicians, nurses better serve their patients. And so that's probably where I would start, Ray, is in terms of giving advice, is the work we do, whether it's important to humanity or not, is hard. It's hard to get published. And so if we're going to do such hard work, and if we've spent so much of our resources, personal and otherwise, getting our doctorates, becoming a professor, getting into the academy, then if we're going to work so hard, we might as well work on really important problems. And the most important problems are serving humanity problems.
Great. Well, let me ask you to expand on how to attack these big problems that you were just encouraging everyone to engage in. And I certainly appreciate that you were encouraging early researchers to do that. Because obviously what you did in healthcare was you had to find a place to start. So what's your advice on a place to start?
Yes. The place to start is first of all, is identifying your core as a researcher, your core as a researcher. What is your true passion? And it has to be your true passion, not somebody else's passion for you. What is your core passion? And for me, I was so fortunate, as was Ray, that very early in my career, I found that my core was services. When I got my doctorate, Ray mentioned I finished my doctorate in 1968, the services field did not exist. There was no such field as services marketing. My PhD is in marketing, but there was no such field. I never heard the words once in my doctoral program from any professor, the word services marketing. I learned goods marketing. I learned how to market soap. I learned how to market an automobile. I learned how to market manufactured products. And that was fine. And I was very interested in that. But I was very fortunate early in my career as a new assistant professor to start doing some work in financial services marketing, because the financial services industry in America was just discovering marketing, the banks. And I realized very early that what I had learned as a doctoral student wasn't working very well when I was trying to help banks improve how they market, because they were marketing an intangible service. And it seemed like every bank that I interacted with in those early years, everybody that worked in the bank was mad at the marketing department. And so that got me interested in the idea of services. And my point, just to move on here, my point is I was very fortunate early in my career, like 2 or 3 years into my career as an assistant professor, to find a true passion for my work. And that was my fascination with services, with intangible products that presented all these different kinds of challenges I'd never learned about in school. And I wanted to dive in and see if I could resolve and help and move the ball forward with some of these challenges. So that's how I started, is I started by the good fortune of finding my real core. And when you find your real core, it builds in you the perseverance, the determination to live through the rough patches, to live through the rejections of your articles, to keep going because you're so passionate about the work. You believe in the work. You believe in its importance. You know you're doing good for other people. And that's what we need. Regardless of what we study, we need to feel that passion in our work. The second part of the question, Ray, I'll try to keep this short so we can move on, is when it's daunting for someone like me, a kind of a senior professor position, I've been in the field for many years now, to say work on important problems, when many of you on the call are new to the field and you have tenure decisions in front of you, promotion decisions in front of you, you need publications, and it seems kind of daunting. And so the default position for many young scholars is, I'm going to work on important problems after I get tenure. Right now, I just have to get published. And that's the wrong way to think about it. The way we can work on important problems from the very beginning is we divide the big complex problems into small pieces. And we do a research problem, we do a research study on a piece of the problem that's practical, that's reasonable, that's doable in order to do a dissertation, in order to submit a paper. And then we work on another piece and we build our expertise. And it's like building a bridge. We build it one piece at a time, but all the time we're working within our core and we're working on an important problem and we're creating more and more expertise as we go. So think about it that way. So it's not such a daunting issue if you're interested in poverty and how to help people who live in poverty. It's such a complex, multidimensional issue. It seems overwhelming for someone, especially new to the field. But if we think about poverty in terms of its pieces and work on a piece, and then work on another piece, and then work on another piece, we're within our core and we're contributing to the literature and we're building our expertise with each piece of the puzzle.
All right, great. Well, let me switch to a related aspect of what you were just discussing, Len, which is really the issue of collaborations, because obviously ServCollab is interested in collaborations, and the service research field itself has a long history of collaborations that have really mattered quite a bit. So I'll just start with one part of the possible collaborations that you especially have great expertise in, which is the process of developing collaborations outside the traditional field that you started in, like I did in marketing, and collaborations with others outside. And obviously healthcare is your most recent example of that external collaboration.
Yes, I've been studying healthcare for 20 years. Ray mentioned I was looking at a sabbatical leave, and it's such a gift that we have in academia every once in a while to have the opportunity for sabbatical leave where we get paid to develop ourselves, to go off into a new place and develop ourselves. And I wanted to take full advantage of that. And this was in 2000, year 2000, 20 years ago. And so I thought, what am I going to do in my sabbatical leave? I need to find a new mountain. And I realized that as a career services researcher, there was a huge gap in my background, and that was the gap of healthcare. That I'd never really formally studied one of our most important services of them all, economically and in terms of the consequences for good service for patients. It's just one of our most important services, and I knew little about it other than the fact that I'm an occasional patient. I had never studied it. So that was going to be my sabbatical project. And it turned out to be the new mountain that I was seeking. And when I studied at the Mayo Clinic. I went off to the Mayo Clinic to study. I was there in residence in Minnesota and also in one of its campuses in Arizona. And I got into the middle of this study at the Mayo Clinic, and I was so fascinated and taken with the complexities and the challenges and the opportunity for improvement in healthcare. And I just felt, as I was learning about healthcare for the first time at the Mayo Clinic, I just felt that, there's all these problems. And I have a background as a business person, as a service researcher, as someone who spent a lot of time focused on service quality. I have the background, I can help fix these problems. I was a little ahead of myself and probably a little too full of myself, admittedly. But I started learning about all these problems in healthcare, and I felt they're fixable, that we just can't accept them. They're fixable. And while I was at the Mayo Clinic, before I returned to Texas A&M, I decided I'm going to devote the rest of my career, and this was 20 years ago, to transitioning from a general services researcher to become a health services researcher. And I found myself on a new mountain. And I came back to Texas A&M. I told my colleagues, and this is what I was going to do. And they were very supportive of me, that I was not going to be a traditional services researcher. I was going to dive into healthcare and see if I could help. And it's now 20 years later, and I've been true to that commitment. And I feel, frankly, I can tell you honestly, I feel a lot of pride that I lived up to a commitment I made 20 years ago. And it wasn't easy. It's still not easy, because when I got back to Texas A&M, Ray, I really struggled. I had made this investment. I'd been at the Mayo Clinic for 7 years, it seemed like that, 7 months in residence, living in a 1-bedroom apartment away from my family, away from all of my comforts at the Mayo Clinic. So I'd made this big investment, and I wanted an immediate return on my investment. So I got back to Texas A&M, and I wanted to publish something in a medical journal, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know the journals. I didn't know the literature nearly well enough. I didn't have anybody in medicine to work with. I was on my own, and I just, for months, I truly struggled. But then maybe 7, 8, 9 months later, I started to calm down. I was really frustrated. I was wondering if I was on a fool's errand, that, people publishing in medical journals are physicians. They're PhDs in health economics, people like that. I can't compete with these people. They're career healthcare people. I'm a marketing professor. But I settled down and decided, okay, I do have a competitive advantage, and I have to leverage that. And that is, I know I know about service quality. I know about services marketing. I know a lot about business. And the people who are writing the medical journals generally don't. So that's where I'm going to really focus my work. And that leads, sorry, Ray, I took a long way to lead, to your question about collaboration. I realized that if I was going to publish and make a difference in healthcare, make a real contribution, I had to publish for the right audience. And that was the audience of physicians and healthcare leaders and administrators, people in government. And that meant I had to publish in the medical journals. And that led me to finding physicians that would work with me, that would publish with me. And I've been very aggressive in doing that. And today, it's 20 years later, I built this incredible network of these really wonderful, smart, humane, caring, compassionate physicians in different specialties around the world. And every medical article I write is co-authored with physicians because they know a lot that I can never know. But what happens when you go outside the business school and collaborate is you learn that you know a lot that they don't know. And I was surprised at first that physicians were interested in collaborating with me because we sort of look up to physicians. We put them on a pedestal, don't we? You know, they're so smart and they know stuff that we don't know. But the network I have now, they're just wonderful. And by working with physicians on my medical work, and in the last 5 or 6 years, it's been mostly focused on cancer, improving service for cancer patients and their families. The work I do and publish is much better. It's a better product because we're working together. I'm working collaboratively with people that have knowledge that I lack, but that I have knowledge that they lack. And so we pool our resources, we pool our talents, we pool our knowledge, we become teammates, we collaborate, we teach each other. And that in itself, aside from the published work, has been so rewarding to me to learn how much I can learn when I step outside of the business school. So Ray, that was a long answer, but I hope I covered a lot of bases.
No, I think you did, Len. And before I add a little bit more to the conversation, I should remind our audience that you're welcome to enter questions in the chat that you might want Len to answer as we get further into the day. We obviously have an hour booked for the event. We're going to try to save at least the last 15 to 20 minutes of time for audience questions and interaction. So I wanted to make sure I reminded everybody of that. But Len, there's a point you were making about the context with the physicians that I want to ask you to amplify, because I think it might be relevant to some of the others who are in the audience thinking about what they might do. And you mentioned that issue of when you were working on the frustration of what do I do, finding that interface between the business field that you were trained in and what the physicians are trained in, that sweet spot in between the two fields, that opportunity area. To me, that would seem relevant to other types of projects where people are trying to reach outside of the traditional discipline.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that when I finally realized, it took me months to realize how I could actually find a place for me in the medical literature where I could be competitive. And that was to leverage my background. And then I needed people to work with. And I just, I reached out to people. I was reading a lot of medical journals. I subscribed to many medical journals, and I was, and when I would read a really good article on healthcare service that resonated with me, that moved me, I would write to the author and thank the author for that article. And it's something that I've done a lot throughout my career is when I read something that is really good, I take a moment and I send a note to the person that wrote it and thank them for it. Thank them for teaching me, for helping me. And I'll just tell you a story, maybe a couple of stories about how I built this network, right? Because I think that's what you're asking.
Exactly.
How do you
Yes.
find these people? So one of the physicians I work with most frequently, she's just an incredible physician. She's a critical care doctor at Henry Ford Health System in Detroit, Michigan. And she wrote an essay in the New England Journal of Medicine that I read about her critical illness when she, as an ICU doctor, found herself as a patient in her own ICU. And she was really, really sick. And she eventually wrote a book about her illness. The book is called In Shock, INSHOCK, In Shock. It's a fabulous book for any who's interested in it. But she initially wrote an article, an essay in the New England Journal of Medicine about about some of the poor service that she received in her own hospital. Such a brave essay to write for a physician. And I wrote her and thanked her for it because it resonated with me and the work that I was trying to do. And sometimes when I write and thank people for their work, they do not write back, and that's fine. I don't expect a response. But she wrote back right away a lovely note, and I remembered her from such a lovely note that she wrote back. And then I had another project where I needed another physician collaborator. It was a very controversial project where several marketing professors and I, and just one doctor, we were writing a paper on patients behaving like hostages. And there was nothing like that in the healthcare literature, but we went to the sociology and social psychology literature. There's a lot that's been researched about hostage behavior when you're kidnapped or when you're hostage in a war situation. And in reading that literature, the people I worked with and me, we saw a lot of similarities between how patients often act in the presence of a physician. They act like hostages. They stay quiet. They don't want to offend. They don't ask the hard questions. They don't want to be deemed a difficult patient. They don't want the patient. And so we wrote this paper and submitted to a good journal, and it actually got rejected. And I thought it was such a good paper, and I knew in my author bones that it deserved to be published. And so I did something I've rarely done. I wrote an appeal as the lead author of this article, and the appeal was accepted, and we got another chance. And after multiple revisions, it was accepted. But the way we got through the revision process is I talked to the editor, and he said, in our editorial room, this was a major medical journal, in our editorial room, there's disagreement about whether we want to go to this topic, patients as hostages. And there's disagreement among the editors. And what would really help is if you had another physician on the byline. You only have one. And I remember Rena Oddish, that doctor who wrote that lovely note to me, who wrote that brave article in the New England Journal of Medicine. I didn't know her, but I remembered her. And she was so brave in what she wrote, I thought she might be brave again and work with me, even though we didn't know each other. So I just sent her the reviews. I sent her the current draft that we had. And I said, would you join this project? She wrote right back. And she said, this looks intriguing. Give me 3 days and I'll be back in touch and let you know. 3 days later, she wrote back and said, this is a fantastic topic. I'd be glad to join. I have some ideas for revision. Let me send you some of my revisions and we'll go from there. She did a beautiful job of changing some of the passages so they'd be more compatible and agreeable to a physician audience and to the editors. And she also added her own, in a small paragraph, an example from her own experience as a patient, where she, as a physician, felt like a hostage. And she added an example where she was behaving like a hostage, and she's a physician. And I think that paragraph, that story that she added, plus adding her to the byline, got us over the hump, and the article was accepted. And by the way, long answer, they're all long, that's me. By the way, this article, Patients as Hostages in Their Healthcare, which was published in a medical journal in 2021, won the Best Paper Award in Marketing that is given by the AMA and the RRBM movement, the Responsible Research and Business and Management Group. And they have an article award, and it won the best paper. And I was so thrilled because I was able, for a lot of reasons, I was thrilled, but I was able to actually send a note to the journal that published the paper, that was brave enough to publish the paper, that we won the best paper award. It was 3 years later that we won the best paper award for this paper. That's how I found Rena Oddish, this ICU physician. And after she worked on the hostage paper with me, I got in an airplane and I flew to Detroit to meet her. I made that investment. She's become one of my closest friends, and we've written half a dozen articles together so far. And we have more in the works. And I have other stories like that. But in different ways, I built my network. And it usually required me having just the self-confidence, which, you know, is something that is sometimes hard to grasp for any of us, to feel the confidence that we really need to feel to go forward on a difficult project or in a difficult mission, but to have the self-confidence to actually reach out to someone you don't know and ask, would you be willing to work with me on this project? I need someone like you. And that would be my advice, is to go for it. Some people won't even answer your letter or take your call, but some people that you contact will say yes. And yeah, long story.
Well, no problem, Len. That's a wonderful story, and it captures what I think is true of the entire service research field. When you and I were at that first 1981 conference back in the United States in Florida, there were a lot of us that didn't know there were others interested in service, and we got to meet each other for the first time and make those human connections. So your story about meeting Rana Oddish is really a story about building and reaching out to create a human connection. Let me ask one more question related to your articles before we let the audience start interacting with us as well. Because when you mentioned her, it reminds me of a part of your interview with Werner Kunz, in which he asked you what was your favorite article. And I remember thinking when I was listening to the interview, well, I've known Len a long time. He's written lots of articles and they've all had lots of impact. So what's he going to pick? And you picked your article on kindness in cancer care. That's a 2017 article, quite recent, versus all those many quite famous articles in the past. So what I really want to ask you about is that obviously you were applying kindness to cancer care. What are your thoughts on applying kindness to other service problems?
I believe that kindness is one of the most powerful tools, if not the most powerful tool in our services tool bag to improve service to people, to improve their well-being. It seems like such a simple, basic concept, something that we started to learn about as a kid, and it seems so unacademic. And in fact, the way we got this article published in a cancer journal on kindness is we had to take this abstract concept of kindness, and we created a multi-dimensional construct in which we defined and gave illustrations of 6 different kinds of kindness that were pertinent to taking care and improving the care of cancer patients and their families. And just last night, I made a talk to a guest lecturer at our School of Public Health at Texas A&M on kindness. And I presented my hypothesis, and I'm working on a paper right now on this. My hypothesis is that when you couple competence-influenced trust, because most patients trust their doctor's competence because doctors are doctors, and they assume going into a medical treatment that doctors know what doctors are supposed to know to treat them correctly. Until doctors prove otherwise, patients tend to assume that doctors are competent because they're doctors. So my message last night to this student group was, when you couple competence-influenced kindness with kindness-influenced trust, then you have a stronger degree of trust on the part of the patient. When you couple competence-influenced trust with kindness-influenced trust, when you put kindness together with competence, then you get the strongest effects for better patient outcomes. And I took the group through the 6 dimensions of kindness that we wrote about in our cancer article, and I'll just list them for you, and so we can go on. Deep listening to the patient is kind. Truly listening, and doctors aren't always very good at that. They jump in, they interrupt. Empathy is kindness. Generosity, generous acts, kindness. Timeliness. Timeliness is so important when you're seriously ill, waiting for those test results, waiting for the next medical appointment, waiting for the surgery that you really need. Timeliness is so important in healthcare, and timeliness is kind. And there's so much we can do to be more timely in healthcare if we just care enough about it and reimagine the way we deliver our services. Gentle honesty. I talked about being honest. Physicians are often reluctant to be honest with their patients because they don't want the patients to lose hope. But false hope is unkind. And it's also common in healthcare, giving patients false hope. And it leads to a lot of overtreatment that makes patients even sicker than they would be otherwise. And then support for family caregivers. So those 6 dimensions of kindness were what we wrote about, defining them, explaining them, and then giving examples from my research. And that made the paper work. I can't just share with you one of the reviews, and this was several years ago when the paper was published, but I remember one of the reviews to that paper, and the review started out, and I started reading the review. I said, oh no. And because the review started out with, and these are physician reviewers from medical reviewers, where the reviewer was saying, hey, come on, we all know about kindness. We don't need a paper on kindness. We all know what kindness is. But then the reviewer, that's the first paragraph. And I'm thinking, oh, well, this isn't going anywhere, this paper. But then I keep reading the review, of course. And the reviewer is starting to warm up. He said, I kept reading this paper and I never thought about kindness in these different dimensions. Never thought about the different kinds of kindness. And it started to get really interesting. And about the third type of kindness, the third section of the article, I'm starting to think, yeah, maybe this paper has some promise. And the review turned out to be an actually positive review. So it was taking an abstract concept that we kind of take for granted, that we think we all know about, and being kind of scientific about it, going into the literature and creating a multidimensional construct. And that made it work. Yeah. Why is that my favorite article? I have a lot of favorite articles, but Werner, and Werner's on the call today. He's putting all of this on YouTube. Oh my gosh, on YouTube. Werner, I didn't know what questions he was going to ask me, and he asked me this question, so I had to immediately respond. My favorite article my whole career, and that's one of them, kindness. I just love that article. I did it with, of course, my doctor collaborators and another marketing professor, Tracy Danaher in Australia, one of my closest collaborators and closest friends. She was on that article. And yeah, I just think that, Ray, whatever our problem that we're working on is, whether it's working with refugees, whether it's working on the immigration issues that we're so challenged with in America, whether it's working on homelessness, whether it's working on cancer, whatever problem we're working on, kindness is powerful. And I shared with the students all the literature in the medical field. If you bring it all together, empirical literature that shows the positive effects on patients when medical care is truly kind. Truly kind. Kindness results in better results. I said,
all right, well, that's wonderful, then, and certainly your own kindness in sharing all these ideas with us is wonderful too. Radil, are we ready to open the program to questions and comments from the audience? I'm seeing some comments and questions in the chat. So I'll let you decide what we start with.
First, I would like to thank you and Professor Berry for the thought-provoking discussion. We have some questions on the chat. So I will start reading the first one by Larissa Becker. Truly inspiring, her comment. I was wondering, what are the challenges in collaborating with them, physicians? And could you talk a bit more on how you approach invite them? Do you usually have a project idea already, or you come up together?
Yes, excellent questions. In terms of the challenges with physicians, working with physicians, the main challenge is they don't have the time that I have. Research and publishing is a big part of my day job. For most physicians who are seeing patients, that's the big part of their day job. And so in almost all the projects with physicians, I lead them. I lead the projects, I coordinate the projects. Usually we have 3, 4, 5 people on a project. I know how to do that. I have the time to do that. And somebody needs to do that because we're all over the world or all over the country, and we're working through email and conference calls and Zoom calls. Someone has to be the coordinator, or things just don't get done. And it's a year later and you haven't made any progress. And so I, in almost every case, have assumed that role gladly, because that's a big part of my job. And that really helps the physicians that want to contribute, but they have to contribute in pockets of time that they have, weekends or nights, or maybe an hour between patients during the day, during a weekday. That's how they contribute. In terms of ideas, sometimes they have the ideas and they approach me. In the early days, no one approached me because they didn't know who I was. But now that I've been in this field, the medical field, for 20 years, I get approached by physicians who I don't know, who have an idea and want to see if I'd be willing to work on it with them. And sometimes we develop an idea jointly. Right now, I'm working on a piece, and one of my students who's on the piece with me is on the call today, Sanjay Lechaman, the finest student I've had in my career, my 50-year career. And he's an undergraduate student. He's going to medical school next year. He's a senior now. And Sanjay and I have now published 2 articles together in medical journals. He's the first undergraduate business student in the history of our business school to ever publish in a medical journal. Sanjay's on the call today. And he and I are working with a physician, Dr. Mate, on a paper we want to write on the concept of medical malls, because a lot of shopping centers in America and elsewhere are going under because of COVID and everything else. They're going under. What do you do with this property? And how can you make medical care and bring a lot of different medical care more convenient than going to a hospital? And so the idea of a medical mall and making that work and truly integrating care and coordinating care is a paper we're working on right now. And we're trading ideas with the physician co-author, Sanjay and I. And we came up with the idea, we proposed it to him, and he's just come back with his comments. He likes the idea. And so we're going from there, and eventually we'll be ready to actually write the article. And so the ideas come from me, or they come from a co-author, or they are collaborative. Yeah, all places.
Thank you very much. A second question is from Lorena Blasco-Arcas. Lorena wrote, agree, super inspiring. Thanks, Len. I was wondering if you approach also industry collaborations and how. I see the challenges to talk to academics from different fields, but I find even more challenging to work with professionals, especially from other areas.
From Rodrigo, from industry or from other academic disciplines?
Lorena, I assume refers to service industry. To find collaborations within the service industry. Yes. Lorena, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Thank you, Rudula. No, I meant because, I mean, you were mentioning researchers from other areas, so physicians, but providing that you may work also with professionals that are not in the research area, whatever it is, how you approach those kind of collaborations, if it's the case.
Yes. Yes. You know, sometimes, and I've worked with industry, people in industry my entire career. Ray knows that. Ray has as well. In fact, a lot of us in the services community have been very comfortable from the beginning. Werner, you're the same, in working with industry. And it's just something that's very comfortable for me. So I have one foot in academia and I have one foot in the world of practice, whether it's medical or before my healthcare in industry. And the way that I do that is I spend time doing research in the field with companies. I make visits to companies. I started our retailing institute at the Texas A&M. And so I had a lot of contact with retailers because we had to raise money. So I went to the retail companies to raise money all over the country and met the retailers and got to know them and invited them to campus and got to know them better. And then wrote a book and included some of them in the book and got to know them even better and studied their companies. and one thing leads to another. It's all about reaching out. It's about reaching out to industry, to finding a company that really seems inspiring and progressive and has something to teach us in services, and is doing something that's pertinent to our core interest for research, and contacting that company and asking, contacting the public affairs function if it's a big company, and telling them what you're interested in, and could they put you in touch with the director of marketing or the head of customer experience for a 30-minute get acquainted interview. And after the interview, if the company, if it's practical to travel there, getting in your car, getting on an airplane, and going to visit the company for a day or two, and meeting other people and building a relationship. It's an investment. It's an investment that we have to make, to be willing to get out of our office, get out of our comfort zone, and go meet people. And what we find is they're going to be really interested in what we can do to help them. What we can do to help them. And what we're also going to find if we go out and meet people in business is how smart many of them are. The service quality research that Parsu and Valerie Zeithamel and I did, a 12-year study, 5 different phases of that study, we did under the sponsorship of the Marketing Science Institute, which is supported by their industry sponsors. And so we repeatedly made the trek, the 3 of us, several times a year to meet with the sponsor companies from the MSI who were specifically supporting our research and who made available their customers to interview, made available their executives to interview. And then we got on airplanes and went to those companies and did our interviews, did our focus groups, did our executive interviews, got their customer data so we could do surveys with their customers. But had we not worked with the Marketing Science Institute, we would not have done the ServColl related work that we have done. We needed industry. We needed that collaboration. We could not have done it. We would not have been able to develop the ServColl instrument that we developed. We would not have developed the GAPS model without working with industry. Industry managers guided us. They were our sponsors funding-wise, but they also were our mentors, and they also opened the doors to their companies. That's what made our service work, Valerie, Parsu, and my work collaboratively possible, was that academic industry collaboration. So we just have to go for it. We have to go for it. We have to get out of our office. We have to get out of the business school and go for it to make our contributions.
Thank you very much. One more question from Isabelle Garnier. Thank you so much for your generosity and your insights, Isabelle wrote. Quick question. You said, I knew in my author's bonds that it was a good article. How do you know that you are on a good question subject?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, you know, sometimes I always want to, before I submit a paper, I always want to feel proud of that paper. And sometimes it takes multiple revisions. Sometimes it involves inviting someone else to help improve the paper. And I told you the story about Dr. Oddish and the hostage paper. But I don't want to submit anything with my name on it, which is my reputation, unless I'm proud of the work and the people I'm working with are proud of the work, and we all sign off on it and we say it's ready. And so there's certain papers that I'm really proud of, but I'm not sure it's going to get through to my targeted journal. We're never sure. Nothing's for sure. Sometimes I'm really want to be confident that this paper is going to make it in XYZ journal and it doesn't make it. I mean, I get my rejections too. And by the way, they hurt as much now as they hurt when I was just starting out. Maybe more now than when I was just starting out, because I was pretty naive when I was first starting out. And now I'm just so passionate about the work. I'm working in my core, because healthcare, I didn't go to an entirely new mountain. I went to a different part of the mountain, a different part of the service mountain, and that was a healthcare service mountain. So I reinvented myself around my core rather than moving away from my core, which was really key to keeping me in this work for 20 years now. This hostage paper, I picked this journal because this journal, which I read, it's the Mayo Clinic Proceedings, Mayo Clinic's own journal. I picked this journal because I read it, and it had published a number of brave articles in the past that other medical journals didn't seem willing to touch on really difficult topics, like end-of-life care. Should doctors be allowed to end a patient's life when the patient wants that, when the patient is so sick and suffering so much? The Mayo Clinic Proceeding had published really good work on a topic like that, a real controversial topic. They also allowed a longer article than many medical journals allow. Many medical journal articles are limited to 3,000 words. Mayo Clinic Proceedings has one section called Special Article that allows 5,000 words. And we needed more words. We needed that. So I didn't have another option, a good option, for this hostage paper. And I felt in my bones. And sometimes you don't feel it in your bones. You're proud of the paper, but you don't feel it in your bones, your author bones. I felt in my bones, this paper needs to be published. This is a real thing. The word hostage has never been used in a title of a medical journal article ever. In all the lit search we did, we never once found that word used in the title of an article. Patients as hostages. But that's how many patients behave. They behave like a hostage. They shut down because they don't want to offend their captor, or in this case, a physician. And so the combination of really feeling in my bones, this article needs to be published, feeling that I didn't have a great second option for a journal, and I had published other articles in this particular journal, so the editorial staff knew me. I just felt, and I had two reviews. One was, no way, this article belongs in a magazine, not a medical journal. There's no proof. Well, there'd been no article written about this before that we could cite. But there was a lot of proof in other literatures, sociology and so forth. And the other external reviewer, and then I'm going to stop because it's time. The other external reviewer was very positive and had 8 or 9 really good suggestions to improve the article. And I knew when I saw the reviews that we could do those, we could make those revisions, all 8 of them. So that's what led me to appeal. I've only appealed 3 articles in my career. I don't recommend it. I think you move on, you take your lumps and move on. But if you really believe in something and you think that the reviews were wrong, then that is an option that we do have. And that's the only appeal that I've made out of the 3 that was actually worked. And then we went through multiple revisions after the appeal was accepted. That was a great question. Thank you so much for that. And I hope I answered it.
Thank you for answering. We have 2 more questions
Okay,
on
sure.
the chat. So we have one from Karim Sidawi.
Yes.
Len, what do you recommend when dealing with academics from the medical discipline who seem dismissive of service research theory, for example, and marketing in general? How do we build and reinforce those bridges, especially as early career researchers?
Yes, and that's a very real issue that I have faced as a marketing professor writing in the medical literature, because the medical reviewing process is a single blind instead of double blind. We're used to double blind reviewing where the reviewers don't know the authors and the authors don't know the reviewers. That's what I was used to. It came as a real shock when I started trying to publish in the medical literature to realize that I didn't know the reviewers, but the reviewers all see the title page and see who the authors are. And so here I am, a marketing professor, trying to educate and guide and help physicians. And there's a lot of dismissiveness about marketing and mistrust of marketing in the medical community. And so what am I going to do about that? There's a couple of papers that I just could tell from the reviews that they were biased. And I think the bias came from the fact that, and sometimes it wasn't just me, it was Tracy Danaher, who's a marketing professor in Australia at Monash University, because she and I do a lot of work together. She's she's fantastic co-author, fantastic person, and is really into healthcare as I am. So we do a lot together. And so sometimes there were two marketing professors on the byline. Oh my gosh. You know, I'll admit it to you. I have multiple titles. You live long enough in academia, you get more titles. And Diana's going to laugh at me, my administrative assistant, my beloved administrative assistant's on the call today, listening to this call. She's going to laugh at me. When I list my byline for medical publications, I don't list all my titles. I just list one. And I have a chair in marketing, and I'm also a university distinguished professor in marketing. I don't list those titles. I'd like to, but I don't because of potential bias. And maybe this is not right, but I'm admitting it. I simply list one of my titles, and that's a Regents Professor, and there's the word marketing doesn't come after that. I'm a Regents Professor at the university. That's the only title I list. And then I'm also a senior fellow of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, which is a lifetime appointment. So I list that, a healthcare title, and I list those two titles. I just have to be honest. I do that to avoid the potential of bias, the fact that I'm a marketing person. I think I answered the question. I do sometimes, I do face a bias, and it really helps to have prominent physicians on the byline with me. I think that helps counterbalance the issue that I'm discussing. But there is bias, and there's going to be bias in every field, not just the medical field. And and sometimes, we are the victim of bias. We just have to persevere, believe in ourselves and believe in our work and believe in its importance enough to overcome the disappointment, the frustration, or the anger then when we feel that we've been mistreated in our research.
Thank you very much. One last question from the chat. Elena Tang wrote, "Thank you, Dr. Berry, and thank you, ServCollab. As someone who with a graduate degree in virology and with papers in non-business disciplines, I especially appreciate the inspirational stories you shared and the value in publishing with physicians. For a junior researcher, it is even harder to convince your department that it's worthwhile to publish in medical public health communities and have credibility to recruit medical researchers to work on meaningful topics with you. Can you offer some advice on that?"
Yes, very good question, very real issue. I work with one of the things that I do at my university, and I really love doing it, is we have a formal mentoring program where our more senior faculty work with our newer faculty as mentors. And I'm currently working with two of our new faculty. They're both fantastic, brilliant scholars as their mentor. And we meet once a month and talk about these things. And one of my mentees just published, actually one of the articles that just got published, a medical article with me, and she is in her second year with us. And so in a few years, is have to go for tenure and promotion at Texas A&M in marketing. And the reason we brought her into the medical paper is because she had real interest in the topic, and she had a real interest in a background in the topic, but it was going to be in a medical paper, and she still has to get tenure. And when our tenure committee is going to look at, you know, the top tier journals in our field and all of that. You all know that the drill there. So, but she is already well underway in publishing marketing work in marketing journals, in top tier journals. She already has 2 articles in the Journal of Marketing, and has other work well underway and advanced review. And so she's doing fine. And so the fact that she's building a more traditional record, when you then add in the medical work, then that works well. That works well, and there's synergy. But I tell my mentees, you can't just go up for tenure with medical work, even if they're in top tier journals, as some of these are, because that's not going to work in a business school like ours. But if you do the more conventional, acceptable kinds of research as you're going towards tenure and promotion, then it's a much easier story to tell about your overall portfolio of work by also synergistically fitting in work outside your main field, whether it's medicine or something else, some other science, some other field outside your main field, but it works, it's synergistic with the work you're doing in the more conventional journals. So think about telling a story of your work, your research, telling a story where the parts fit together, where the parts fit to your core. And if some of that work is outside of the mainstream business journals, that's fine, as long as you have enough work in the mainstream business journals too. Then you're compiling not only a good record, but even a more impressive record, because you're demonstrating at an early point in your career this curiosity, this intellectual curiosity and ambition to go beyond the business school to address important problems. So that would be my advice. It's not an easy road, but that would be my advice, and that's how I advise my mentees.
Thank you very much. We don't have any other questions on the chat. Is there any other oral question that someone would like to raise? No? So Ray, I guess we're at the end of the event.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for those questions from the audience. And Rodilio, I'll let you close the program. Len, it's been very wonderful to have you on as our first ServCollabing with guests. So Rodilio, it's your turn to close out the program.
Thank you, Ray. I would like to thank you both for this insightful discussion. I was personally very inspired, and as a Mediterranean, I love the passion that you both expressed about research. And I got many ideas, and our audience, I think, as well. I would like also to thank our ServCollab officers, Werner Kans and Karim Sidawi, for assisting with the technical preparation of this event. Katerina Panina for preparing the nice flyers you saw on social media. But most of all, I would like to thank all of you for attending this event, for supporting ServCollab in all our activities. And before we close, I would like to inform you that we will have another event. Is the first ServCollab ideation workshop on refugee well-being on October 15th. This event will be organized by our project officer, Sertan Kabadayi. And you will hear for us about this event very soon in the next few days. So I would like to thank you again all for being here. I would love to see you in the future, in our future events, and would like to wish you a happy academic year. Thank you all. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.